everybody. I don't know that I can follow like really cool music like that, but hopefully that got you going and got you ready for this fabulous masterclass on the top 5 things that you must do to get consulting clients. I am Deb Zahn, and I am the CEO of the Craft of Consulting. So excited to have you all here talking about one of my favorite things in the whole world, which is to get clients so that you can get the income that you need coming in the door. So I want to start off and just sort of give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. So I want to start off with actually talking about what's not in the top 5. There's a few things that sort of linger around often in consultants' brains that I just want to knock off the table so that we don't have to worry about those things. And then I'm going to talk about and give us kind of a framework for the process for securing clients and filling your pipeline and kind of what the heck a pipeline actually is, because that'll help us then dive into what those top 5 must-dos are. And I'm not just going to say what they are. I'm going to talk about how to apply them. And you'll see in how I talk about how to apply them that you can adjust them to your unique circumstances. And we'll get into some fun things and some examples of how to do that. And then stick around at the end, because I will be giving a special offer. And it's a special offer related how to help you get more clients faster. And the main goal is to not only get the clients, but to also do it with a lot less stress. So I'm going to be talking about some ways that you can tap into things to be able to do that. Let me start with saying who I am and why the heck it is that I'm talking about this, and where all of this information comes from. So the thing is I don't just teach other people how to be a consultant. I am today a practicing consultant, and I've been doing this for over 13 years. And in that time, I've generated over $11 million in consulting deals. And at the end of this year, I'm going to bump that number up. And routinely since the beginning, where it was a little harder, but once I figured out how to get clients in the door, I've generated 6 figures. One year it was 7 figures, even part-time. So in 2019, I went part-time as a consultant. So I do about 40-50% and have earned well into the 6 figures, even working part-time. And the beautiful thing is that because of the things I do, including many of the things that we're going to talk about today, I never stress about work. I have a steady, reliable pipeline of work. I don't worry about it. I still do things to fill it, but I don't stress about it the way that I did at the beginning. And I'm also known for being able to close deals, and in particularly deals with high value, clients and contracts, and, really hard to get clients. And in fact, I just printed out a contract earlier today that a client sent me that would fall into that category. And you'll hear me talk about this. I don't just do it for the money. I really love what I do. So I'm a healthcare consultant, and I think that what I do is really, really important and helps patients ultimately, which is what I care about. So being able to close those deals means that I'm able to show up at clients and be able to offer my goodness and help them with things that are really tough for them or things that they aspire to. Now, in that time, since I started the Craft of Consulting a few years ago, I've also coached over 100 new consultants, and with the real goal of get to the good part. The good part is being able to do the work that you love to do and being able to bring in good income. So my whole purpose is let's just reduce the stress and fast track that so that you can get to the good stuff that you ultimately want to do. And that's why I work with new consultants as well as consultants who've been doing this a long time and they just want it to work a little bit better. So that's why I'm talking about this. Let me dive into it. I want to knock some things off the table, like I said. So there's certain things that don't work in terms of trying to get clients. And the first is, and this is one of the big mistakes I see a lot, is waiting until clients come to you. So being a consultant is a business. It's not a spectator sport. You got to actually actively do things to get clients and to be able to do the work that you want to do. And so a lot of times what happens is you'll be new to consulting, you know your stuff, you've had success in your past work life, and now you're a consultant and you're going to tell people and then work will just come in. And what a lot of new consultants find is that doesn't happen. And even a lot of consultants who've been doing this a while, if you don't actively and very proactively do things to try and make sure your pipeline's full, you cannot guarantee that you're going to get the clients that you need. So it's kind of often a rude awakening people have. So I just want to knock that off the table. So I'm going to be talking about things that are all about making decisions and taking action, which is how you fill your pipeline. The other thing I want to say is you don't have to wait to do some of the things I'm going to talk about, or even start your consulting business until you're 100% confident. And again, this is something I see. It's like, well, I'm not confident enough to like reach out to someone or try and get business from someone or try and get a client. You don't have to be fully confident. What you have to have is just enough confidence to take the next step, and then to take the next step after that. And what happens is as you start to take steps, and as you start to see, wait, things are actually getting better, and some of the steps I'm taking are really working, your confidence will build over time. So don't worry if you're not 100% confident yet. It's okay. You just need to muster up enough to do the next thing. So the other thing I'd say is, I want to just knock off the table, is relying on just doing one thing. There are very few consultants that I know, and I can count them on one hand and still have fingers left, who only do one thing to get clients. For most consultants, there's a variety of things that you have to do to bring clients in the door and to keep your pipeline of work full. So it's not just you're going to post sometimes and then clients will come in. It's not just that you're going to reach out to, or go to one networking event and then you're going to be fine. There's multiple things that you have to do. And so we're going to talk about what those are today. And then the last thing that I want to say is don't give up. So if what you've tried so far hasn't worked, or hasn't worked to the degree that you want it to, that's okay. It's typical. It's very usual for that to happen in any course of having a consulting business. All it means is that you have to figure out what decisions you need to make to send it on a better trajectory, what actions you need to take in order to get the clients in the door that you most want to work with and that are going to give you the income you need. So don't give up. Change tactics, change strategies until you find the thing that actually works best for you. And the folks that I've seen who've been wildly successful, and I would include myself in that, are the folks that even though we were having a rough time and we're kind of floundering, we didn't give up. We figured it out. We pushed through, and then everything got easier after that. Doesn't mean everything was easy all the time. It just meant things got easier after that. So all those things, not in the top 5. We're not going to do any of those. But I do want to at least give people a framework, because one thing I realize with a lot of consultants, particularly new ones, is what the even process is for getting clients isn't necessarily well known. And why would it be? If you come from employment, you wouldn't necessarily know this unless you've been in sales and marketing. You wouldn't know this. So there are a lot of much fancier versions of this, and there's some simpler versions of this. But let me sort of walk through what the process is for getting clients. And the point that I'm trying to make here is it's multiple steps, which is exactly what it should look like. And it's often multi-pronged. And so the first thing that you have to do in order to get clients is you have to build awareness of who you are and the wonderful things that you do. And again, there's not just one way to do that. You would do that in a lot of ways. And the whole goal is that you're trying to create awareness, not just about yourself, but the value that you provide to the folks that you most want to work with. And you might do that through reaching out to your network or networking events. If you've had clients, getting repeat business or getting referrals from them, going to events, whether you're a speaker or you're at the reception and you're talking people up, RFPs, marketing. And you notice I put marketing last because I think marketing is actually really important to getting clients, but it's not the whole thing. So I don't want to put it first and then you're doing a whole bunch of social media and boom, you raise enough awareness and now you're going to get all the clients you need, because I generally don't see it work like that. But you have to have some way that the right folks are becoming aware of who you are and the value that you provide, so that ultimately you can get down to the point where you have leads. And leads, very simply put, are actual, now you're down to people. So there's awareness of who you are. And now it's got to be, okay, who are folks that make sense for me to pay attention to in some way? Because I think there's some reason I might be able to work with them. I don't know for sure yet, but there is at least now human beings that I can do something with to try and get business in the door. And then ultimately, it is trying to among them identify, well, who do I think an actual prospect is? And if you've Googled things or you've talked with other folks, often the definitions between lead and prospect can be very, very different. I'm going to give you sort of my version of it, which is a prospect is someone who is more about, or you've had potentially some engagement with, where you're thinking, wait a minute, there's a really good reason to believe that this person could potentially be a source of business for me. But you have to identify who they are, because if you have hundreds and hundreds of leads, that can be really overwhelming. That can be a lot to work with. You ultimately have to get it down to a meaningful number. And I'm going to talk about a little bit later then what to do with that when you figure that out. But you identify, okay, who might I be able to actually work with that I think I might be a fit for? And then you're going to do a number of things, including some of the things we're going to talk about today, to cultivate those prospects, because it's not just identifying them and obviously you're going to get business. You have to do a number of things to try and be able to get in front of them. And when you get in front of them, have the right conversation that ultimately leads to either them asking for, or you suggesting that you do a proposal for a particular type of work that you're going to do for them. Now, proposal, it doesn't stop there, because there's a whole lot of proposals that don't ultimately become contracts, and there's a whole lot of contracts that don't ultimately become work, interestingly enough. But you ultimately want to close the deal, and closing the deal means you got a contract and the work actually starts and they truly become a client. Now, before I get on to delivering value, I want to say something about why I have a funnel here. And it's interesting. There's people that love the idea of the funnel and people who don't like it. I'll tell you why I like it. Mainly because I want to set appropriate expectations and I don't want you to feel bad about yourself. And what I mean by that is that you're going to create awareness among a lot of folks, but not all of them are going to be clients. At each step of this process, once you go down to the different things that you're going to do, it's fewer and fewer people. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's very, very typical in the work that you're going to do. Now, your funnel might look a little bit different than another consultant, but it is usual that ultimately who becomes a client isn't everybody that you've cultivated awareness with or identified as a lead at the top or even identified as a prospect. And that's okay, because ultimately what you want to do is you want to work with the right people, because that's going to help you build your reputation and build your business. Now, speaking of reputation, the reason I have deliver value down there is I never want anybody to ever think that this stops at actually getting the client. You have to deliver amazing value to them. And what I mean by value is you have to get them the results that they care about, and you have to give them a stellar experience. And if you do both of those things, that's actually how you deliver value. And then, and I don't have this in the diagram because I didn't want it to be too fussy, is if you do that, then often they will pop right back up to the top and they'll be a source of referrals. They'll be a source of additional business. They'll be in your network and helping you. They'll invite you to their events, etc. So it can end up being a very virtuous cycle of actually getting the client, doing a fantastic job with them, and then that helps you generate more business. So that's generally what that means. And so when people talk about their pipeline, if you haven't heard that word before, what they generally mean is moving people through this process. And as you start to develop your consulting business, or if you've already been doing it, you'll have different people at different stages of this process. And that's actually really a good thing, because you don't want everybody down here at close the deal, because that could end up being more work than you can actually fulfill. You want to make sure that over the course of a year, you've got a nice steady flow of business. So somebody asked the question, can you comment on the time lag between identifying a prospect and closing a deal? Sometimes it takes a long time for a variety of reasons. That's 100%. It can. One of the things that you do as you develop your pipeline is you ultimately have to manage it, which is where you have to see, first of all, when you start, what is that time frame? Because it depends on the client, it depends on the industry, and it depends on what you do. It depends on the type of work. So I'll give an example of that. I do a variety of different things as a healthcare consultant. And if I'm trying to get a past client to hire me to be a trusted advisor, so that's often a retainer engagement. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm providing them with strategy support and a number of other things. Because I already have that relationship and they've already experienced me and they've experienced and they have trust with me, that's often a much shorter time frame. And I'm also very deliberate in who I'm trying to get that work from. I don't try and get it from people who I know can't afford it. That's often a very short time frame. That might be something that I can negotiate within a month. If I'm doing strategic planning for someone and they have a process that they go through to, identify who they work with, or even if it's a repeat process with me, that might take a little bit longer. I've done it enough that I know generally what it takes to do that. I also know that if I respond quickly, if I am very, very good at listening to them and feeding back to them with great clarity the things that they say that they want, and I'm doing a really good job of managing the process with them, it can also go faster. But I would love to tell you that there is, it usually takes 6 months, it usually takes a month. The answer, unfortunately, is it depends. Some of it is in your control, some of it is not in your control. But one thing I would say is, as you're thinking about the types of offers, the types of work you want to do, the types of clients you want to do, you want to think about what you think the lead time might be. So if you're, trying to get business with a startup and they haven't gotten their next round of funding yet, well, then you're going to have a long lead time. Those are things you want to think about ahead of time when you're identifying ultimately who you want to work with. And then you want to track it over time so that for example, if you're looking at your pipeline and 6 months from now, it's looking a little sparse, and that it typically takes 3 months to get the business because you've been tracking it over time, well, then to mark in your calendar when you need to do some of your cultivation activities. So that's the type of thing that you ultimately learn to identify and manage as your consulting business is going along. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the 5, but I want to say first why I picked these, because you'll see how I talk about a lot of these. I picked these because they are things that a lot of consultants, regardless of whether they're new or they're more mature in their business, a lot of consultants struggle with, and it can get in your way of getting clients. So that's why I picked these. And I'm going to start to dive into these, starting with my absolute favorite one. And there's a reason why this is first, is focus and clarity. You have to give yourself the gift of focus and clarity. And that's across multiple dimensions. I'm going to talk about what those are. But one of the most common mistakes that I see is trying to be everything to everyone. And the reality is that if you go out into your industry or your market or anything like that, and you're like, I can do anything for anyone, and I see that quite a bit. First of all, no one believes that you can really do everything for everyone. They're not going to understand that. And also they're going to have to try and sift through, well, do they do what I need? And the truth of it is that most people aren't going to put out their time and energy and effort to try and figure out, well, are they valuable to me? Because that's what ultimately they care about. And so you're going to miss out on a whole lot of clients because you aren't focused and clear enough to them to be able to articulate why they should pay attention to you. And so what do I mean by that? And I want to break it down in a few ways. And the first is that you need to define the who. So the who is who your buyer is. And sometimes this is called an ideal client, sometimes it's called an avatar, and it's basically sort of the typical person that you ultimately expect is going to buy your services. And I use the term buyer. I switched to a certain part. I used to say ideal client, and I switched, And I started to say buyer only because I saw a lot of folks struggling with picking someone who, or picking a type of person that was actually going to be able to pay them. And it was the person who was actually going to be the decider. And so what happened is people would think a lot about, well, in my dreams, who do I ultimately want to work with? And that's an important part of the process. But ultimately, you have to think about the business side of consulting. And the business side of consulting means you've got to get someone who is willing to give you money to do the wonderful things that you do and help them achieve the results that they want. And they're purchasing that from you. And it's helpful to just kind of embrace that early on. It doesn't mean that you're going to be a sleazy salesperson. Please never, never do that. I never encourage anyone to do that. But it just means you're really clear that this is who I'm working with. And I'll give an example of this with myself, which is my buyer is a CEO in particular sectors. I have a few different buyers, and this gets to the where in the healthcare system. I know it's a CEO. There's other people that are consultants who it's the VP of HR. Other people, it's the chief, information officer. Other people, it's, managers that look like this. And you have to know who those are with enough specificity so that you know who to go have conversations with, what types of things you're talking about. And I'm going to get into some of those details in a moment. So you have to know the who. You got to know the buyer. You got to know where they are. So that's where you can define a particular, market, a particular industry, or it can be across industries. It doesn't matter as long as it gives you clarity enough to know these are generally who I'm working with. So for example, if I say that I'm working with hospitals, well, there's a vast difference between, academic medical centers, hospitals in big urban centers than, rural hospitals who have all kinds of different struggles than some of the big ones in the urban centers. I got to know that well enough so that I understand my buyer much more. And I'm going to, again, talk about that more in a minute. And then picking a niche, if a niche is helpful to you. Now, again, not everybody needs to do this. I think it can be very helpful for a lot of folks to think about, okay, does it make sense to get really specific? And in my case, when I started, it did, because I was going way too broad. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment and talk about how a niche really helped me. But a niche is where you would narrow it down even further. So now you're getting really specific about who your buyer is and where they are. And then the last is the what and the why. And the why is kind of the why you, which is to define your value proposition. And it's your value to that buyer in that particular market or that particular niche. So if you signed up for this, you should have received a tool that actually can help you define this. It's a value proposition tool that will help you walk through this step by step. If you didn't get it, in the comments, go ahead and put the word client. And if you put the word clients, then we will send you a value proposition tool after this training. We'll shoot it over to you in Messenger to make sure that you actually have it in your hands. It will help you walk through everything I'm talking about here. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, Deb, I don't have enough clients. Are you actually suggesting that I narrow down who I'm trying to get business from? And the answer is yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. And I understand that when I say it, it seems counterintuitive. And I completely understand. It sounds like if I narrow down, then there's not enough clients in there for me to get. And I'm going to give an example of where this actually worked well. And by the way, if you're putting clients in the chat and you are anonymous, don't worry about it. Go ahead and just shoot me a message on LinkedIn and put clients, because I understand there's some folks that may not want to identify themselves. Shoot me a message, say clients, and I'll make sure that you get the tool. But let me give you an example of myself, of what happened when I went too broad. And this was right at the beginning of me being a consultant. And I said, I'm a healthcare consultant. And I thought that sounded good. It was true. But healthcare is so big and so broad that was virtually meaningless. And it didn't mean anything to anyone. And so I had a lot of struggles of figuring out, who should I go talk to? When I talk to them, what am I talking to them about? What do they, I didn't know enough to be specific. So I was kind of saying, oh, I can do anything for anyone in healthcare, which is not true. And so what I did finally, and I didn't know, I didn't know that defining your buyer was a thing, I would admit. So somebody gave me that suggestion, and I got really specific. And this is where I actually picked a market and a niche. So I decided what really makes my heart sing is I want ultimately things to be better for patients. That's why I'm in healthcare. And again, that's not specific enough because I'm not talking about working directly with patients. And I looked back at my experience. I looked back at where I had contacts and I had a really robust network. I looked back at where I had really great results that I could point to. And I said, actually, this makes sense that I niche down a little bit and I pick a very specific sector within the healthcare market. So mine happened to be community health centers because that's where I'd had tons of experience. I'd worked at one, I knew a lot about them. I'd done a lot of work with them. And so I said that's who I'm going to focus on. Once I had that clarity, it was so much easier to figure out what to do next. It was so much easier to show up and have the right kind of conversations because I gave myself that gift of narrowing it down enough so that I knew what to do. And again, having a market, having a niche, it's a tool to make life easier for you. You're not a tool for it. It's a tool for you. So you only do those things if it's really helpful for you. And it was amazingly helpful for me to do it. So that's my example of why this is such a great thing to do. The next thing I want to say is you also have to center the client. And what I mean by that is you put the client at the center of what you're trying to do, including when you're trying to get business. Because the common mistake I see is that a lot of consultants who are trying to get business focus more on themselves than the prospective clients that ultimately they're trying to get work from. And so it's not about you and it's not about your resume. And one of the mistakes I've seen, like let's say you can even get into a call with someone who, you're hoping that will hire you and someone starts to read their resume. And I understand because what they're trying to do is to say, hey, I'm valuable. But the folks on the other side don't really, they might like you, they might be impressed, but that's not really what they're after. So it's not about you, it's about them. It's about the things that they care about. And I'm going to dive into that. And this is also where it's not about closing the deal. And I know you see this and you're like, but didn't you say earlier we're supposed to close a deal? The answer is yes. You are actually supposed to close a deal. That is 100% true. But what you don't want to do in any way that you engage folks that you hope to get business with in any way, you don't want it to look, feel, taste like you're only trying to get their money, because they will hate it and it will ruin your reputation and it will turn them off completely. And I actually have a podcast coming up with a client, actually a client of mine, who talks about this, talks about being really turned off when you can tell that a consultant is only trying to close a deal. They're not trying to figure out whether or not it makes sense to close a deal. So that's why you have to center the client in everything you do, because ultimately they are people. And they hire people who they believe can help them solve their specific problems. So not generic problems, their specific problems, and help them achieve their specific aspirations. So the things that matter most to them, and not for nothing, give them a really excellent experience. If they see that from you when you're engaging with them, they're going to be much more open to have conversations with you, much more open to, move down the path and ultimately hire you. And again, I've seen horrible versions of the opposite of this, where it's push to try and close a deal, and it ends up going nowhere. Or if you do get it, you often don't get a second one. So I want to dive into some details of what I mean by centering the client, because this is where the details actually really do matter. So on the left side, it's really about understanding. That's why you have to know who your buyer is, because you can only know these details if you know your buyer really well, is what are their pain and gain points. So pain points are the problems they're trying to solve, the things that they're struggling with, the things that are actually causing them some pain. Gain points are the things that they're trying to get, what the aspirations that they have, the new things they're trying to do. And you have to know both of those well enough so that if you post something, if you engage with them, if you have a conversation with them, they're listening to you and they're thinking, oh, she gets me. You also want to know their priorities because they can't do everything. They've certainly thought about, or they have a feeling of the things that matter most to them. So they're not necessarily going to hire a consultant for everything that they struggle with. So you got to know what actually matters most to them and what matters enough to them that they're willing to spend some money on it. You have to understand the context that they're actually operating in. Are there threats or opportunities in the larger environment? Are there things coming that maybe they don't know about? Again, you have to know your buyer well enough to know what's the context that they're operating in. Is it a situation where there's really high competition, in which case you better know that, because that's going to speak to the things that are their priorities and their pain and gain points. Is it a situation where, they're really struggling to get dollars in the door? You got to know that context in order to be able to really hit on the things that they're going to care enough about to hire someone, let alone hire you. And then also their experience, what it is that they've generally been experiencing in their market, in their industry, in their world, and the types of experiences that actually matter to them. Now, you're not going to know that for every single lead that you possibly have, but you're going to get it. If you have a really good sense of who generally your typical buyer is, you'll know this enough that it will help you make good decisions and take some good actions. Now, I'm going to talk about preparation later, which is where you have to get this down to, a little more detail when you're going to start to engage with a specific person. But on the other side, you have to know your value. And again, that's why the value proposition tool is so helpful, is because you have to know your value to them, not your generic value, your value to them. You have to have how you describe yourself, describe your offers, whatnot, be really reflective of who the clients are that you're actually going after, even the questions that you ask them. So this is one, the worst example is showing up and say, what keeps you up at night? And I hate that question because I think it's kind of a lazy question. And it basically says, I didn't bother to try and figure that out ahead of time, so I want you to just tell me. Instead of walking in with some recognition of what those things already are, so that your questions really, really help surface the stuff that matters most to them, and also reveal, the things that and the things that are valuable about you. And even your proposal has to reflect who the client is. I've seen proposals that have like, here's who I am at the beginning, and it's me, price. And then, oh, by the way, here's what I'm going to do for you. And that doesn't center the client. Instead of, helping them understand, I get you, I understand who you are, I understand what the context is, I know how to get you where you want to get to. It's them. And then at the end, you're like, and by the way, this is why I'm the right person to help you with this. So everything becomes about the client. The more you shift towards that orientation, the more they're going to feel it. It's going to resonate with them. They're going to trust you more, and you'll ultimately end up getting more business. So I'm going to give you a really concrete example of two wonderful women who started a consultancy and are now doing just amazing things. And I did a little coaching with them, and what they said that they were really struggling with is that they didn't have a problem actually getting on calls with people or getting into meetings with people, that they had a good enough network that they were able to actually get there, but that wasn't translating into clients. They're having conversations that they thought were good, but they weren't getting any clients. So what they ultimately did, based on some suggestions that I gave them, is they flipped it to really focus on the client. So they did a really brief introduction to say, essentially, here's who we are and here's what we're doing now. Super short. It was essentially their value proposition. And then they had really good questions. And I'm going to talk about sort of the categories of questions that are really helpful later. But they had really good questions. And what they did is they turned it around to make it about who they were talking to and getting them to reveal what was going on with them, getting them to reveal what was happening, them being able to ask questions that really turned it into an actual discovery process. And then at the end, because you can't just have a discovery process and say, okay, well, that was great. hopefully keep me in mind. You don't want it to end with that. Is at the end of it, again, this is kind of the line I use. They said, well, we heard a couple things that we think we could be really helpful with. Are you open to talking about that? And the answer was, oh my gosh, yes, because they had already provided so much value in that conversation that they were able to land a client. That was actually the first client they get just by flipping how they were doing it. Less about them, more about the client. And that's how they've been getting clients nonstop since then. So that's a really concrete example of how this can work. Now, the next one is really about practicality. Which is segment and then act. So common mistake that I see is applying the same strategies to everyone you may want as clients. And the thing is that not everyone in your market is the same. They don't warrant the same type of or degree of action. So everyone that you've said could be a lead, you could have hundreds of people, in your customer relationship management system, your spreadsheet, I don't care, Post-it notes, I don't care how you do it at this point, but you could have so many people that it's overwhelming for you, and they don't all make sense necessarily to do the same thing with. And so to make it manageable and ultimately more fruitful, I suggest segmenting. I'm going to talk about what those segments are, but I want to give an example of where I saw this. So I was working with an office of consultants, brand new office, brand new consultants, never done this before, but just, were wicked smart, had a lot of great connections. And what they did is they basically wrote down and they put it in a spreadsheet, everybody that they knew. And it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people because it was 5 people who'd been around and done a lot of really cool things. They knew a lot of people. And then they just started walking down the list and trying to reach out to everybody. And it wasn't going really well. They weren't getting any clients. So I went in and I'm like, no. Take that list, segment it. There's going to be some people who it makes a ton of sense for you to reach out to first because they're more likely to end up with giving you a contract than some of the people who maybe it doesn't make sense to reach out to them now, but it makes sense to nurture them in some other way. Once they did that, now they knew what to go do. It was so much easier to prioritize what they were going to do on any given day. And they started to have now more connections that bore fruit and ultimately got them clients. I'm going to talk about what those segments are. And again, I've seen this much more detailed. I like to generally keep things kind of simple. So this is really what I do. Is first segment are folks who you have some good reason to believe that they need what it is that you do. And very practically, this is where I'm a very practical person, you could actually get a meeting with them. So if you ask them for a meeting, they're going to say yes, and you can get in the door. The reason why that's important is because those discovery meetings, discovery calls are where the magic happens. It doesn't happen by just doing social media posts. It doesn't happen by, any other sort of more distant thing that you might be doing. You actually have to engage with folks. And when you engage with folks, that's where you start to really move it towards, them becoming a client of yours, if that makes sense. So very practically, some really good reason to believe they need what value you offer, and you could get a meeting with them. And you start with them first. The next level, and you might be working these at the same time if you really don't have a full pipeline and you have the time, is folks who, again, you have a good enough sense that they might need what you offer. You may not know exactly, but you think you could likely get a meeting. Not all of them are going to say yes. Most of them are going to say yes, and then there might be a few that fall off, and that's okay. You start with them next. Again, very practically, who can you get into those meetings with? You go down to the third segment. The third segment are folks that you hope to work with. So you like them, you know them enough to know that they're doing some really great things. You still might have a sense that you might be a fit for them, but you don't know as well as you do in the first 2 segments. And you think that there's a path to getting a meeting with them. So you might not be able to reach out to them, directly. They might know you or know you by reputation, or it might be someone in your network who knows them and can do an introduction, but you've got some way to get connected with them. again, with the hopes of trying to get into some type of meeting with them, because that interaction is where the good stuff happens. Then you go down to the fourth one, and these are folks in your network that you aren't really sure if you can do something for them. You hope that they might have connections that are helpful to you, but you aren't 100% sure. But you don't ignore them, because this is where you get into sort of the numbers game, which is to be able to say, something different. Like if I'm in tier 1, I'm going to do a whole bunch of research on them. I'm going to know who they are. These folks, I'm basically going to do, more general outreach, more general marketing. It's still going to bear some fruit, but it's not where I'm putting all my effort. And before I go to the next tier, I want to answer a question. How do you tailor your approach to contacts that have known you as an employee and now they're prospects? Yes. So I actually really like those types of connections, because if you had a good relationship with them and they have some sense of your fabulousness already, they can be a really good first place to start. I actually honor whatever that relationship was. So I have actually worked for past employers. I've gotten business from them. And generally I will have much more personable conversations with them. So I generally would put them in tier 1 if I know that I can get a meeting with them. We will show up. We'll have probably a little more back and forth with how they're doing, what's going on for them, anything new coming up. But then I do make sure that I transition that conversation to now talking about, the types of things they may need. I might already know they're struggling with this because they were struggling with it when I left. Why don't I go in and suggest that I do this for them? In which case, because I have that insight, there's no reason not to propose it. That's how I got an engagement with a past employer. Or maybe I've been gone for a little while. It's going to be much more personal than, and I'll have a little more back and forth than I do with someone I don't know as well. But I am going to say, I'm going to ask them questions about, what's going on at the workplace, what kinds of things have been happening. I've noticed that this is happening in the larger environment. How have you folks been preparing for that? But it's going to be a lot more like I'm talking to a peer and I'm talking to a colleague. But if I've got insights and I'm leaving a job and I know they don't have anybody to replace me, and I don't mind going back and maybe doing some pieces of my job before, but now as a consultant, or I know they've been struggling with something, and I'm saying, look, I think now that I'm out, I'm in a good position to help you with this. Let's talk about that. Use those insights to your advantage, but just make sure they feel like very collegial conversations. I'm going to talk about later, there's going to be another sort of thing that you have to, one of the must-dos that also talks about, how you work that conversation towards a conclusion. But that's how I do that. And, past employers, your last employer, if you left on really good terms, great places to start. And if it was employees that went somewhere else and you had a really good relationship with them, great place to start. I would definitely put those either in segment 1 or 2. And if you need more of an answer, feel free to use chat to dive in. But the 5th segment is people who don't know you today. So they don't know your name. They don't know you by reputation. They're in your market. They're in your niche. There's some reason that they ultimately, might be folks that you work with, but they're going to take a lot more cultivation. They're going to take ways for them to get to know you. So sort of that, that whole pipeline, they're really at the beginning where they have to have some awareness of you. This is where marketing can be really helpful. Marketing can be helpful with the other segments too, because people will see you and be like, oh my gosh, oh yeah, that's right. She's a consultant now. Love to talk to her and see what she's doing. But this is where you're trying to do things that get more people aware of you. You're trying to get, you're trying to figure out where does your buyer actually show up and how can you be there so folks can start to see some of the value that you can potentially offer. But I don't start here. And I see a lot of consultants just like jump in and start to do marketing. And marketing is a wonderful, fabulous thing. You have to do it. But it's not the only thing that's going to get you clients. There's things that you can do on the outreach side that are likely going to get you clients faster. Okay, the fourth thing is prepare like you want clients, and I say that a little tongue in cheek, but I really do mean it, because if you did all this work to get in front of the right people and try and get into, the right conversations, you want it to go as well as possible, and the only reason it goes really, really well if you prepare for it. I would say of anything that I do, preparation is my superpower. I do this very, very well because I want to walk in and I want to be, prepared for making sure that it goes in the best possible way that it can. Even if it doesn't end up in having a client, I want it to go really well so they walk out and they think, that was great. she's smart. She's doing some great stuff. Now, the contrary thing that I see happening is winging it with prospective clients, because you may figure, hey, I know my stuff, I'm good, or maybe it even that I know this person and I don't really need to prep, so I'm just going to go have a conversation. And the thing is if you wing it, one, they can usually tell. They can usually tell that you're not, prepared, and you might end up having great conversation, but they can tell that you're not really prepared to get business. And it also signals what it's like to work with you. So every encounter, whether it's on social media or in person or on Zoom or whatever it is, anytime you have any encounter with anyone in your market or prospective client, you are telling them this is what it's like to work with me. So if you are actually getting onto any of these calls or getting into any of these meetings and you're not prepared, or doing an event and you're not prepared, you're saying, yeah, this is what I'm like. I'm not prepared. I just wing it. And that does not send a good signal to folks, and that doesn't make them want to work with you. Now, I'll give an example, which is one of the earliest examples I have of where I mess this up. So at the beginning, I thought, because I didn't know better, I thought that how you get business, you go out and you talk to a whole bunch of people. You go have drinks with them, you have tea with them, you have dinner with them, you do, whatever, and you pick up the tab, and that's how you're going to go get business. And I did so much of that. I had so many, like, tea and drinks and all that. I was like waterlogged was really the main output that I got from that, but I wasn't getting any clients. And it wasn't that those encounters were going poorly. They were going great. We left and it was like, that was super cool. But I wasn't prepared to have a conversation as if they were a prospective client. And I don't mean just having a transactional conversation, because that can get really gross, although transactions are a very important part of getting business. But prepare as if everyone I was going to meet with, I knew them well enough that I knew what conversation to have with them. I knew what questions to ask for them. And they're one of the first clients that I ever got. I met with, I think it was 3 or 4 times, and we were friends. We'd worked together before. So she was at a different, sort of sister organization to mine. And we worked on this like really great project. She knew I was good. She knew my stuff. I didn't understand why she wasn't hiring me. And I realized at one point, it was actually a suggestion I got with someone I worked with, who I said, I'm not really looking at her organization or at her and thinking through all those things I talked about earlier, centering the client, really thinking through what's going on for them. What is it that they're struggling with? What is it they're trying to achieve? So I went back and I did my research, and I looked at the organization. I looked at, it happened to be a membership organization. So I looked at what was going on with their members. I looked at what was going on in the larger environment. And I really walked in prepared. I had questions prepared. I knew exactly, how I was going to approach it. And the meeting was completely different. And by the end of that, I actually had a client. She's like, get me a proposal. We had the conversation we should have had because I prepped. And by the way, that client ended up being a client that I worked with multiple times over many years. So here's what I mean by prepare. I want to get into the details on this, because this is what I do. So first of all, like I said, I research who I'm meeting with, the actual person, the organization where they are, what's going on around them. I try and think about, the context in which they're operating. There was someone who I've now worked with multiple times, but I'd never met him before. And I ended up seeing a video that he did, and he was talking about something I really cared about. So not only did I know more about him and knew how he thought about things, I was actually really excited to meet him because I'm like, that was amazing. And so it also generated this kind of energy that I knew was going to show up in the meeting because now I was excited. I also think through what type of results do I think they might care about? What type of results do I think I could help them achieve? I think about, anything that might match what I think they have a demand for. And demand, by the way, is really important to think about in a consulting business. Demand is a need that they're willing to pay someone to help them with. So a need, they could have a need. They might not know it. They might be trying to fix it themselves. They might not be willing to spend money on it, but a demand is where they're willing to spend money on a consultant. And then I prepare very specific questions based on that research. And there's 3 categories of questions that I focus on. The first one is where I ask questions where I'm trying to get them to reveal what their true demand is. So I have a sense of what's going on for them. I have a sense of what they might need. I'm trying to get to, what do they need so much that that they're willing to spend money. So do they not have enough, demand? Do they not have enough people to work on it? Do they not have the expertise that I have? Do they not, necessarily know how to approach it and they need some help figuring out strategy? I think through those things that are going to help them reveal what they truly have a demand for. I also ask questions that demonstrate my knowledge and my skills. So I'll give the example of that again of the client that I just talked about. There was a whole big shift that was going on in the larger market. And so what happened is I thought about them relative to it. And I really looked into, what that shift was, timing of it, all this good stuff about it. And so when we got into the conversation, I said, well, sort of here are the things going on, and here's what these, sort of different entities seem to be doing. How have you folks been preparing for that? And in this case, how have you been preparing your members for it? And she stopped and she said, oh my God, well, we've been paying attention to it, but we haven't been preparing for it. And then we were in a conversation where I had thought through, well, what would preparation look like? And we were off to the races, and what I ultimately, the engagement I got with them was to help them prepare for it. I also then think through questions that I could ask that help pivot the conversation. And so this is where I now have to try and make it a little more transactional. And I have to say, something that will actually get us into a conversation about what a true engagement would actually look like. So again, the example I gave earlier is kind of one of my go-to ones where I'll say, I heard, X number of things that I think I could be helpful with. Would you be open to having that conversation? And I like to use sort of permission-based language, and I always make sure there's time for it. But now we're in a conversation where I might be able to engage them. I've actually also said, oh my God, that is right up my alley. I would love to help you with that. Can we have would you be open to having a conversation about it? That's a question, but it's a pivot question. And you want to have those in your pocket because it's hard to think of them in the moment, particularly if you're nervous and you really want to work with them. I've even sent, past clients, a text afterwards going, num, 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 num. I love that. Can we have a conversation about, what I could do to help you? That's with someone I knew really well. But I also think through, all right, what type of objections might they have to potentially working with me? What kind of curveballs do I think, could potentially come up? Because I don't want the first time that I think about those to be when I hear them say it. And so often if I think that they might have an objection because I'm a solo consultant and really they think this is going to take a few people, they might have an objection, if they perceive that I'm, really expensive or something like that. So what I try and do is I try and think of those ahead of time. And then in the first part of when I'm actually talking to them, I try and actually lay those to rest. I say things that address them without them having to bring them up. Or if they do bring them up, it's not the first time I've thought about how to answer them. And again, sometimes I'll hear an objection or there's a true curveball where I didn't see that coming, but I've at least anticipated and prepared for most of them. And then this one, I cannot emphasize this enough. This is so important, is you don't want the first time you say really key things to be when you're in the moment. So you want to practice actually how you introduce yourself. So practice saying who you are. And I mean, practice it out loud so you actually end up with the muscle memory for it. You want to say, you'll be able to say who you are, what you do. If you talk about, how you help people get results, or what results you've helped people achieve. You want to practice saying those things out loud so that you're saying them as close to smoothly as you possibly can. And I will say, I've done this for over 13 years. I'm really good at winging it. I have flubbed this up so horribly because I didn't practice ahead of time. And I practice each and every time because I want to be really smooth about it as much as possible. Not like gross and slick, but I want it to roll off my tongue and I don't want to sound nervous. And sometimes I still get nervous because I'm like, I really want to do that work. And I don't want to come across as that. I want to come across as more confident. And then I would also say it also is a practice in eliminating consultant speak. So synergy this and, level set this and that, like practice, figure out how to say it in plain language, and then practice saying that. And by the way, that's one thing that clients that I work with repeatedly say that they love, is that I don't use consultant speak. I say it really plainly and they just love it. So you want to practice saying those things. And then if you're going as a team, if it's more than one person, really you got to prepare as a team and you got to do it as a lot. It should come across as choreography, not chaos. And I've been in situations where it is choreography and it's so much easier to get that business. And I've been in the chaos versions and it is awful terrible. And you lose a lot of chances to get business if you haven't really thought about it ahead of time. So this is what I mean by prepare. And it doesn't have to be hours and hours and hours, every single time, but enough time where you feel like you got a really good sense, when you're reaching out to them, or you got a really good sense when you're actually going to be talking with them. Number 5, this actually wasn't in my original top 5. And I actually, because I've done this masterclass before and I changed it to this because this comes up. I have a membership, which I'll be talking about later, but this comes up in the membership quite a bit. It came up yesterday on a training we did that I gave, where we dug into the details of how to, really get the details related to your buyer. Is you have to guide the conversations you have with them to a conclusion. You can't assume that they're automatically going to end up where they need to end up. It is your job. It is not the client's job to get to a proposal or to close a deal. That's you have to understand that as part of what you do on the business side of consulting. So what I've seen is particularly in discovery or sales conversations, where the conversation just kind of goes wherever. And the problem is you can't then guarantee it's going to land where it should. And if you really are the right person to help them with something they have a demand for, then it really should land with you moving it towards getting a contract with them. But they don't automatically happen. So you have to guide it where that you want to guide it to. And I'm going to talk about sort of how to do that, because you don't want to be so loose that it kind of goes all over the place, but you don't want to be too firm that it makes the conversation kind of stilted and they feel like they're being corralled too quickly to a place of talking about an engagement. So you're kind of looking for that sweet spot, that sort of just right spot. And so here's some of the things. I have a bunch of things in my toolbox that help me do that. So the first is concise description. So again, that goes back to the preparation. Is if you've practiced things and you've thought about things ahead of time and you have concise descriptions, that helps you say, in response, let's say, to something they say, oh yes, I've seen a situation like that before, and here's how we got to that result, and it's nice and it's tight and it's clear and it doesn't sort of ramble so that they're not really sure where it's going. Very specific strategic questions. The questions that you asked, as I said earlier, are one of the ways that you guide the conversation to the place it needs to be. And then the pivot conversations, guiding it towards, now let's talk about what an engagement is. And by the way, you have to make sure that you have time for that. You can't leave that for the last 3 minutes or 1 minute and hope that it's going to go where you want. Deep listening is a skill that you can cultivate, and any really good consultant, and particularly consultants who are good at getting business, do this quite well, where they're not waiting to say the next thing until the client stops talking. They're listening very deeply. They're looking for additional places they can probe and get a deeper understanding of what it is that they have a demand for. They're listening for ways that, I could really help them with that because I've been in that situation before. They're listening deeply so that they can respond more effectively. And then having those really concise responses that are advancing the conversation. In some ways you can do that, which are kind of, mirror a lot of negotiation tactics, is mirroring what they say. So to be able to say, okay, I what I'm hearing is these are your priorities, and to be able to state that back to them, not artificially, but in a conversation, for them to be able to say, oh, okay, yeah, those are our priorities. Or sometimes I'll say that and they're like, actually, those aren't. To tell you the truth, what really are this. And now we're getting closer to what I might be able to help them with. Summarizing. So I'll summarize, what they said, and say, does that sound right to you? And then if they say yes, now I can advance the conversation forward. Framing is what I love to do, where they might not be able to say to me, oh, here are our top 5 priorities. They might not know what those are. They might have said a whole bunch of stuff. And because I'm listening very deeply, I will say to them, so it sounds like you really have 2 priorities. It's this and it's this. Does that sound right to you? And then I might tackle those one by one and say, so in this priority, what I'm hearing is that you have, these sort of problems moving that forward, or here's what you've got at the table that already can help solve that, but you really need help with this. I'm going to look at some of what they say almost like puzzle pieces, and I'm going to put some of those puzzle pieces together for them so that now we're getting closer to talking to how I might help. And by the way, they experience that as extremely valuable. And so it might be the first time they've actually had that level of clarity. And now they've gotten a taste of what's valuable, and they're going to want more of that. So doing things like that to make sure that you're moving the conversation forward. You're also watching the time to make sure that you don't get to the end of it and you don't really have a conclusion. The same holds true actually when you're doing marketing or you're doing networking, is you have to be, really clear about what you want them to do next. Really clear on strategies that are actually going to get them to do that thing. So I've seen many times where folks don't know that what they're really trying to do is to get into a conversation about this specific thing. And so then again, the conversation goes everywhere. So now when they're marketing and networking, it's all over the place and I can't tell really where we're headed. Really clear and easy call to action. So, this is true if you have a website, if you're out doing marketing or you have a post. If there's a thing you want them to do, and often it's, hey, schedule a time to talk to me. Take me all the way there. Tell me that's what you want me to do. Make it really easy for me to do it. Have a link to your calendar. So all I have to do is click it and boom, I can get a meeting with you. Make it super easy for folks to do that. And don't make folks, struggle to understand, like, why should I care? What do you want me to do? How do you want me to do it? You're leading them on a path, and it's a good path because it's a path that leads them to getting the help that they truly need and they truly want. But you are guiding them towards that conclusion in everything that you do. And that's where you want to look at it and you want to say, is it really clear how I'm getting them from this point to this point? And am I putting things in there that they don't really have to do and are just going to cause friction and frustration, and I should just get rid of those steps because that doesn't really matter. And so filling out a whole contact form and making them give you all of this information, and they haven't even talked to you yet. They don't even know why it's worth their time to do that. I would get rid of that. Just make it easy. Schedule a call with me. So someone asked in the comments, Deb, any guidance for folks working on managing the tension and emotion between a starving consultant, so I need the money, and landing a deal because you can truly serve the client? So this is really, Rob, I love this question, because you have to embrace the reality of your situation. If you need to get money in the door, you need to get money in the door. And that's why you're going to be really focused and really clear about your decisions and your actions. But when you are having any engagement with clients, this is where you need to switch your mindset and really make it about them. That can be very difficult to do, but you want to make sure that you're cultivating in it yourself. Like, do anything that ignites empathy for them. Empathy is one of the most powerful tools as a consultant. And the reason you want to ignite your empathy and you really want to look at what they're doing and have a heart about it, relate it to struggles you've had, relate it to other things that you care about, is that you don't want them to get any sense of the desperation you have to get income. And if you overthink about that, like, you have to acknowledge it and you have to embrace it, but if you overthink about it, it can leak into your conversations. And so this is where cultivating your mindset towards not just centering them in action, but really caring about who they are. So that's one of the other reasons to spend so much time defining your buyer. Is I defined a buyer that I actually care about. I really care about that they can't hire anybody right now because of the job market. I really care about that they're just struggling to figure out what's the best path forward and they don't know how to do it. I care about that. And so when I'm engaging with them in any way, I try and shift my mindset towards that. But I know that I also need money in the door, and that's okay. It's okay that I know that. I'm just trying to not make it their business. I'm trying to just keep that at my business. And Rob, tell me if that's a helpful enough answer for you. All right. So those are the 5 things. That's the focus and clarity, centering the client, including the way that I just talked about, segmenting, who you're doing what with, and then, taking action, prepare, like you really want clients, and then ultimately knowing it's your job and taking steps to guide conversations towards the conclusion they should be. And again, that conclusion is working with them if it makes the most sense to work with them. If it doesn't make sense to work with them, I've had conversations with folks where the most obvious conclusion is sending them to somebody else because they're going to serve them better. And you can be sure that they will remember that, and that helps my reputation. And your reputation is part of how you get business. Interestingly, I was in a call last night where I had sent someone to someone else and they were like, well, we still want to talk to you too. And it was really clear on the call we had with the colleague that I had sent them to that, yeah, actually I am really helpful. So now they want to work with both of us. And I hadn't intended that. I had intended to send them somewhere else. And sure enough, I now have I potentially have a new client. So these aren't the only things that you need to do, but these are really the must-dos that if you do these, you're going to have a much higher chance of getting clients in the door and getting them in at the steady pace that you actually need them in. Now, there's going to be other things that you also need. And the thing that I want to acknowledge, and I think, Rob, your question came to that, is if you're starting or you're trying to grow a consulting business, like, it should be exciting and you should allow yourself to feel the excitement of that. But it can be overwhelming, particularly if you really need to get that income in the door. It can also, and this is something I hear a lot from consultants, actually at any stage of their business, if you're a solo consultant, it could also be isolating. I actually started at a firm and it felt isolating for me because I was too embarrassed to tell people that what I was doing wasn't working. So there's lots of reasons it can feel that way. And what you ultimately want to do is, as I said earlier, is you want to get to the good part, which is you want to do the work you want to do. You want to do it on your terms, right? That's like the reason that you became a consultant. You want income coming in and you don't want to have to worry about it. And I will tell you, as a consultant that doesn't worry about it, it's a huge burden. I worry about other things. That's not one thing I worry about. And it's a huge relief. And you want to have more freedom and control in your life, which truly is one of the best parts of being a consultant. And you want to make it easier to get there, and you want to make it faster to actually get there. So I have all kinds of free ways that you can get help, and you can tap into these things, as soon as you get off, if you haven't already, and they will help you. So one is, I have the Craft of Consulting podcast. You may have heard on my recent podcast that I'm actually not going to be doing that regularly. It's not going to be coming out weekly after January 1, because I got to spend more time with my mom, and she deserves my attention. But that catalog, it will be 345 episodes will be, there for you. Everything that's on there contains really, really wonderful, relevant information. You go to my website, I've got free tools. You can download templates. So some of the things I'm talking about are easier. I'm going to be doing more trainings here on LinkedIn. So I'm going to have a great one after the beginning of the year that's all about pricing, which is one of my favorite topics. I got blogs, I got a newsletter. If you're not signed up to my newsletter on LinkedIn, sign up for that. And then I'll still be on social media sharing, helpful things to help you with your consulting business. But if you feel like you need more than that, like that's not enough to get you to where you want to be, then I invite you to apply for the Craft of Consulting membership. So this is a membership that I have. The link is here. You'll also be getting the link later, where it's a community of folks that have come together in a membership that I lead, and I am in there. I have not hired anybody else to be in there helping people. I'm in there helping people. And the whole point of it is to help you get more clients, to get them more easily, and to have more confidence when you do it. So everything is about helping you learn how to make better decisions, pick up the skills, pick up the knowledge you need so that you get the clients and you make a really good living. That is the focus of what we do. Now you get direct access to me, and you get personalized support. So again, it's not one of those memberships where I tell you to sign up and then I disappear. I'm in there every day and working with folks to make sure that they get what they need. So, example of that is, you really want to figure out, how you're going to get in touch with these types of potential buyers. I get in and I help you figure that out. You want to, do a proposal, you post a draft of it, you get help figuring out, how to change it so that you're more likely to get a contract. Lots of direct support from me. But there's also really amazing, wonderful folks who are also in there. So you also get support and encouragement. And Gemma, love you. You're wonderful. She is a member, and she's attesting to the community and to the resource. And Gemma is one of the people who gives, quite a lot in the community, and other folks do as well. So if you're feeling down, if you're feeling like, why am I doing this? You're going to get support. If you have a success, you're going to have a whole bunch of folks that are going to celebrate with you, and they're going to share what they have found actually works with them. So here's basically the goodies that you get. So you get rapid responses from me. So I recognize that I have to move at the speed of your business. So you don't ask something and then 5 days later I answer it. I answer it, very quickly, usually within 24 hours, often within a few hours, I will answer it. And often what I'll do is I'll post a personalized video where I'll go through and I'll say, okay, here's how I would approach that. Here's how I'd handle that. And then through posts, and I might say, use this tool. This will make it easier for you to take this step. You get direct coaching. So there's monthly Ask Me Anything calls where people get on and they ask any question they have, and we talk about it as a group. I will also sometimes do pop-up conversations. So if a lot of people seem to be really honing in on, like, this is what we're struggling with, I'm like, let's get on and let's have a conversation about it. And we'll do a pop-up. Trainings and workshops. So we just did one yesterday, as I mentioned. So I talked about how important it is to really think about your buyer in a lot of detail. That's what the entire training was about. And then I might do pop-up ones where I'm like, oh, you guys are folks are talking a lot about this. Let me get on and do a training about this. And all of them are recorded in archives, so you can go back and tap into them. And then, because I like to make things easy, is I do tools and templates. So, I also have some courses that are going to be new on there that help you take action faster. So you don't have to make it up yourself. Here's what I use, and it tends to work. And sometimes my members will say, hey, Deb, have you done a tool for that? And I'm like, not yet. And they're like, can you do one? I'm like, yeah, give me a few days and I'll put one up for you. All trying to make things easier and faster for you. So I'm saying it's fabulous. Gemma said that it's fabulous. Here's what some of my members are saying. Again, someone who joined the membership within their first month, they got their first client, and now they've got a pipeline full of clients just being in the membership for a few months. One person, sent me this personally, which meant a lot to me. She's like, look, I've been running my business since 2017, and this was the first quarter she actually was fully booked. So whatever was her problem before, she got into the membership and she figured out how to solve it. This was a great one. This was someone said they got a contract and it pushed them over the finish line for their goal for 2023. And this was a fun one because they weren't sure that they were actually going to go for this. And they got a lot of encouragement from me and other folks in the membership who said, not only you should absolutely go for that, but here's some advice for it. And they ended up going for it, happy that they did. And that's what got them to their business goal. One person got so excited because they got a green light for a project that just was one of the most dreamy things they could imagine. And it's exactly why they got into consulting. Someone else was like, they signed a rock. And if you don't know what that terminology is, we talk about this a lot in the membership is we sort of divide client engagements into pebbles, rocks, and boulders. And it's all about the size of income you get. And ultimately, in a really robust, sustainable consulting business, you have a mix of those at any given time, sort of small gigs, medium-sized gigs, and big anchor clients. And this was a rock engagement, and it was work that's really meaningful to her. And she really loves to do it with a client she's excited to work with. And then, someone else who's been on other platforms said they get more value from this membership than the other platforms they've tried, which I was so excited to hear. So this is just a taste of what some of the members are saying. It is an investment. Absolutely. This is something that you have to say, I want to invest in my consulting business. I want to invest in my growth. And you can, if you want to make that investment, generally, if you get one new contract, you've made up for that investment. It'll pay for itself. Now, you can lock in the 2023 rate. I am raising my rates for any new members, not existing members, but any new members in 2023. So right now it's $187 a month. That's going to be the price until the end of the year. So if you apply before then, you can lock that rate in, and then you can lock it in for a lifetime. If you want to just pay for the full year, which several members have done, I love that. So I'll give a 20% discount for that. Now, after January 1st, it's going to go up about 20%. So it'll go up to $225 a month. And you can still pay for the whole year if you want to, but obviously that's going to now, be over $2,000. So if you're interested in this, then I do encourage you, beat the pride increase and apply before the end of 2023. Now, the membership's not for everybody. I'm going to be honest about that. Not everybody is going to be a fit for the membership. I'm not a fit for everybody. And I get that, and I'm fine with it. I want you to know that it's right for you. So I do give the first 30 days for free. And so if you submit an application, and I'll talk about the process in a moment, and it's accepted and you enroll, you get your first 30 days for free. Get in there, try it out, ask questions, engage with folks. And that's how you're going to know if the membership is right for you. And if it is, you just keep on enjoying it. And if not, you say, I want to cancel. You cancel before the end of the 30 days. And that's all you need to do. And you won't be charged anything after that. So here's how it works. If you're interested, you submit an application. I do ask for an application because I don't accept everyone into the membership. I am looking for, do I think that this is going to be a fit? And I will be honest, I'm generally looking at, there's certain industries that I'm not interested in supporting. That's the main thing I'm looking at. But I also want to make sure, because I do ask folks, sort of what it is that they're looking for help with. If I think it's something that I can't really be helpful with, I'm honest about that. And I don't want somebody to get in there with expectations that can't be fulfilled. So you submit an application. I'll let you know in 3 business days if you're accepted. I usually do it pretty quickly. And then if I accept you, you enroll in the membership. There's a process you'll get to do that easily. You start getting help. You start getting the support you help. And again, you're not paying for it for the first 30 days. So if you're interested, here's how you can sign up for the membership. You'll also get a direct link in email. It's in the comments right now. But we do also have a little bit of extra time. If anybody has any other question that they want to ask, I will stick around a little bit longer, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. And one thing I'll say when folks are thinking about a question is, Rob brought up the point where I talked about mindset, and mindset used to be one of the five, and I bumped it off for guiding it to a conclusion. But we talk a lot about that in the membership, and I talked a lot about that in my podcast and some of my blogs, because mindset is basically what will actually drive your decisions and your actions. So it does take a lot of cultivation. And I do talk quite a bit about developing a business development mindset. And I have a tool for that. So if anybody also wants to get that tool, just write "gimme" in the comments, and I will also send that tool. And what it does is it works with two sort of mindset traps. And those mindset traps, which are very common, are aversion to selling, which is a huge one because no one likes to be gross and salesy. And the second is scarcity mindset, is perceived scarcity around, oh my gosh, is there any business out there for me? So if you also want to get those tools, just put "gimme" in the comments, and I'll make sure you get that as well. It's a little surprise here at the end. So someone asked, what are examples of industries that your members are consultants in? So it's across the board. As I said, I'm in healthcare. There's a couple of other people that are in healthcare, public health. We have people who have, do climate change, people who do learning and development, people who do consulting relating to different aspects of operations. There are people who, help other folks with business development. I'm trying to picture everybody's faces. There's people who work with, clinical labs. I mean, it's really across the board. And what we found, lots of gimmies there. I love it. What we found is that a lot of the same things apply. So, people are able to give people advice. I'm able to give people advice kind of across industries. And that's why I started this, and I didn't want to be industry specific, because I knew, the basics are the basics. Some of the things you have to do are some things you have to do, because ultimately you're trying to get business from people. And so how do you get business from people? And that's the kind of things that we talk about. Someone said, this has been so helpful. Oh, they brought up imposter syndrome. How do you overcome that as a consultant? Yeah, so I have a ton of tips around that. So the first thing I would say about imposter syndrome is distinguishing between being in having sort of, difficulties related to being in an environment where people are treating you poorly or treating you as an imposter. And that's a whole different thing. And there's a wonderful article, I wish I had the link to it, of two women who talked about that, particularly related to racism. That's a whole different thing. If it's imposter syndrome, or you literally have doubts about your ability to make it work, or you feel like you're a fraud in situations, one thing is, that's also where, one of the biggest tips for me is I try and make the 2-foot drop from my head to my heart. And I really try and focus on the folks that I most want to work with. And again, igniting empathy for them, and trying to focus again more on them than am I a fraud. But then I also spend a lot of time thinking through very deliberately, and I do it with Post-it notes. Other people can do it other ways, where I think through what are the results that I've actually done and I've actually really contributed to. And just say it very clearly. If I still have a hard time getting past it, I need to go have some conversations with people who know me, know my value, and will be honest with me, and who won't be mean to me, but they'll be honest with me. And I'll talk to them about, what is it that you really think I do well? What is it, what are some of the results that you think I either helped achieve or contributed to? And getting some of that outside feedback can be really helpful. One of my members who works in public health, she also, every time she got a compliment from a client, she wrote it down and she kept a spreadsheet. And then every time she started to feel doubt about herself, she'd go back and look at it. And it was just, some people will put it up on a bulletin board in front of them, but it is something that you work with on an ongoing basis until you start to see the good that you're actually doing in the world and the good that you're actually doing with clients. That to me is one of the big antidotes for it. But we talk a lot about that, definitely talk a lot about that in the membership. So someone said, thank you for all of this. How important do you think a website is for marketing purposes? I love this question. How active does that site really need to be, in your opinion, to really help developing business and getting potential clients to click and set up a meeting? So I'm going to, true to being a consultant, I'm going to say it depends, but I will say that I don't have a website. I don't think I need one as a consultant. Now, part of that is because I'm well known in my industry, but even when I first started, there was a website that wasn't very good, so I didn't want to send anybody to it, and I didn't really need it. Now, there are certain consultants who, yeah, you absolutely do want a website because, you know, maybe you do design work or maybe you do process work, and the only way that you can really show people is sort of visually, in which case it makes sense. I generally find that a website, and it's not true in all instances, is one of the places that people go to kick the tires to see if you're legitimate. So that can be really helpful. But I also see a lot of people using LinkedIn for the same purposes. If their buyers are on LinkedIn, sometimes they'll go and they'll look at their profile. And if you got a really good profile, that can take the place of a website. So I think it's not an absolute necessity. I wouldn't wait until you have a website to go out and try and get business. And again, you can use a LinkedIn profile if that's where your market is. And you can start with that because that's a place that you can actually send people. But a website that is active, if what you're trying to do is really get all over time people to come to you because you show up in search engine optimization, SEO is what that's called, and you want to produce a lot of content because it's relevant to what you're doing, that you wanted that to be a way that you get people interested and engaged in you. You can do that. You just then have to know that one of the strategies you're doing to get business is to have content that constantly appears on a website. And then you have to do the things that actually make it rank, which is a whole body of work. If that's part of your strategy because you think that's what your buyer will respond to, it's worth it. The CEOs that I work with that are my buyer will never go to my website. They would know. They will look at me on LinkedIn, but they don't go and kick around websites. They're not looking at my blogs. Interestingly, a few of them have listened to my podcast because they want to see if I'm interesting in a good person. But that's why knowing your buyer, and if your buyer is the type that would go around and you think, look at a website, and if you're not sure, go ask a few of folks that kind of represent your buyer or know your buyer. Then that makes sense. But I don't think it's 100% necessity, and I don't think putting everything into it is a necessity unless that's a strategy. Same goes for having an email list. Is if you think doing email marketing is a way that you're really going to get business, then that's one of your strategies. If your buyer will never look at an email and say, oh my gosh, I should meet with this person, then that strategy doesn't make sense. That's how you adapt it to things that you're doing. Okay, let me see. We got some new comments coming in. I love that. People are saying they love it. It's useful. They're still saying, give me. Okay, any best practices for a LinkedIn profile who's someone who's transitioned from corporate into full-time consulting? You definitely want that to be client-centered. You also want it to show your personality, but you want it to be client-centered. And if you want to see a really good example, and this guy named Zach Pike, he's a data scientist, and I'm a huge fan of his. His presence on LinkedIn is fabulous. And he actually came into the membership and he talked about how he now gets most of his business through LinkedIn, through what he's done. He has a really good profile that would be an example. So it shows his personality, but it's also focused on the client. It's not your resume. It's not talking about yourself. You want people giving you recommendations and things like that. But his is a really good example of, I think, how to do that really well. And he's a great guy. And he engages with people all the time in a legitimate, heart-centered, generous way. And that's sort of the short version of how to do it. Again, he came on and we have an amazing training that he gave on how to do this. I also did a podcast with him where he talked about his strategy, and that strategy now meant that he had to do the strategy he used before meant he had to do a whole bunch of outreach, and now it's mostly folks coming to him because of how wonderful and generous he is on LinkedIn. Okay. Oh, thank you, Maheen. Thank you. That's so great. We have another person who did a fabulous podcast with me that was on, so you should definitely go listen to that. Any other questions in this last minute that we have? All right. Well, again, if you are interested, please go check out the membership. I'd say if you also have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to me. I do answer people personally. I'm happy to tell you things about it. And I'll be really honest with you if I think it's right for you. There's been some folks who have reached out and they're busy. They don't have any time. They don't think they could dive into it. And my advice to them is wait until you have a little more time, because the people who get clients are the people who get in there, ask questions, engage, join trainings, join the coaching and things like that. That's the people who get results. So I'll be really honest with you if I think it's a fit for you. So feel free to reach out. But thank you everybody so much. This has been so much fun. And I know your time is valuable. So I appreciate that you were willing to share it with me. And if I don't see you in the membership, you'll see me on LinkedIn again sometime after the beginning of the year. And we're going to be talking about pricing, which is so much fun. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.